So hello, I'm Knud Eriksen from Denmark, and we're here in Denmark for a two-day seminar. Very interesting seminar. We are about to end it off soon, and it's called Revolt Against Civilization. We're not revolting, but the theme is that there has been a revolt against civilization, and we're trying to dig into this from many, many angles. And I have here with me from Croatia, all the way from Croatia, and also actually just as much from the USA, Dr. Tomislav Sunic. I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly. It's been anglicized to Tom Sunic.
Precisely.
And he's a scientist. He's a professor of political science from the USA, and his language skills, which are quite extensive, are from his time before that, I suppose. It's from his time in Zagreb, Croatia, where he obviously speaks Croatian, he speaks English, but he also speaks French and German fluently, which has helped him a lot in his particular pursuit. So, welcome, Professor Sunic.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I appreciate it.
And I appreciate that you took the time to just step out. You're supposed to have lunch even now.
No, my pleasure.
We hope that'll be a little bit left for you.
Thank you.
Now, your lecture yesterday, which was very interesting and important in this context, was actually the monotheist mindset and its secular modalities, Homo Americanus and Homo Sovieticus. Like this, of course, reminds me that we have to show the various books you've written. Probably this we should take first. It's called Against Democracy and Equality, the European New Right, which is a philosophical movement, and that was actually a thesis.
Yes.
From your political science doctorate, and this is a popular edition of that.
Right.
And there's a new one. There's a new edition of this came out, right?
It's a new version. It's a new version, and it has a nice preface by my friend Alain de Benoit, who is considered, so to speak, the main figure, the main philosophical figure in this cultural, intellectual movement known as the European New Right.
Which I'll very much likely to expand on a little bit
sure,
later.
By all means.
And also you wrote, and that's probably with your background, of course it is, from the United States, Homo Americanus, child of the Postmodern Age.
Yes.
And you know, because I like to make things simple so my little mind can grasp it. Sure. You said something like the Americanism, which is sort of a short word for this. It's actually the Jewish mind distilled, which is a very interesting comment we might also take up.
Yes, indeed.
And then this Postmortem Report, which was one of the latest books.
Yes. This is basically the collection of my essays that were previously published in some academic journals in the United States of America. And this book is actually divided in three parts. The first part deals with the comparative religions, like monotheism, polytheism, and their secular transpositions in the modernity. And then the second part deals with some quote-unquote political and historical events, particularly as far as the Balkans is concerned, the multiculturalism and the Balkans, how it functions and how it malfunctions. And then the third part also contains a couple of translations that I did from French, specifically from Alain de Benoit, into English, dealing with the problem of democracy. And also I'm discussing some issues, and there are semantic distortions. For instance, the word democracy. Democracy means nowadays quite one thing from what it meant in the ancient Greece.
Exactly.
So I think this is a good book. It's a good starter.
It's a very good starter. I started reading it. I just got the books a few days before we got here, so I haven't read them obviously. But I read the forewords, and I understood that Alain de Benoit, what's his name?
Alain de Benoit.
Yeah. He is sort of the leading figure and a good friend of yours.
Yes, good colleague, good friend indeed. I can say he has pretty much influenced me. And by and large, I agree with his analysis. Of course, there are always some differences, and there are certain things I may not fully agree with, but he can say the same thing about me. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
But he's a great scholar. I should definitely say he's one of the best scholars in the United States of America, specifically as far as this issue of monotheism and polytheism is concerned.
But he's still living in France now.
Yeah, he's in France, and he frequently holds lectures all around the world, even in some prestigious places. Of course, given the fact that he is quite critical of liberalism and communism, that certainly doesn't make him a very, very politically correct figure nowadays in the media. But by and large, he's a well-respected gentleman, well-respected scholar.
Yes, he is very respected, and also in his foreword, I don't remember for which version, but in his foreword, a very long one, he also says that, well, you were the first positive sort of scientist who took up the description of the new European right, because there have been several books about it, but always from a very hostile point of view.
Yes, in fact, I need to clarify right at the beginning, the expression the new right is false, and Alain de Benoit doesn't like this term, neither do I. But I need to tell you that back late in the 70s, this specific cultural grouping, so this is not a political movement, this is not a political party, the European New Right. This started as an intellectual, aesthetic, as we say, Kulturkreis, the Germans call it, cenacle, if you wish, in the French. And later on, the detractors of Alain de Benoit, the detractors of those intellectuals, the leftist detractors, Marxist detractors, they call them the New Right. So we ended up using the word, the expression rather, that was to start with, used by our detractors and by our enemies.
Just because the press has made it known.
Because I need to tell you also on the etymological level also, this word, this expression, the new right, lends itself to lots of different definitions.
I read that.
When you say in America, the new right, then you think about neoconservatives.
Which is the opposite, exactly.
And neoconservative is the radical opposite from what I stand for, from what Alain de Benoit. Having said that, it's very important what I said yesterday in my discussion, that we have to deal more intensely with concepts and with the etymology of words. Like even the word Nazi or racism, race, those words are no longer words, they become symbols of utmost evil.
Yeah.
And this actually sidetracks the real analysis of the problem.
And obviously that's the idea by the elite, so-called.
We can say political opinion makers, yes.
No land, and
yes,
we have to deconstruct all these funny things.
Deconstruct, precisely, that's a good point.
And of course, also the Benoit says something about liberalism. It's really also a concept which is totally understood in one way in the USA and in the opposite way in Europe.
Absolutely. This is very important what you have just said, sir, because in America, when you say liberal, it almost has a derogatory, pejorative ring, so to speak, especially among Republicans and conservatives.
Yeah, it's like a communist.
Like a communist almost. Whereas when you say liberal, a classical liberal here in Europe, Margaret Thatcher, she was a liberal. Giscard was a liberal. They were certainly not conservatives in the traditional sense. And hence, again, the reason that we got to be always, prior to any lecture whatsoever, we got to know how we are dealing with concepts and who defines those concepts.
And one thing about the new right, the European new right, the Benoit new right, and your new right, is, well, one of the problems, of course, is how do we get all this right, we think it's very right, philosophy into the mainstream, of course. That's what some people are a little bit critical about. Are they doing anything except discussing? And of course, French, we know, they are notorious for discussing and being philosophical. They can sometimes hardly use a screwdriver. There has to be, some practical side to that. Do you see a practical?
Sure. Well, look, I need to tell you once again, the European New Right and affiliated type of thoughts, they have nothing to do with daily politics. Alain de Benoit specifically, including myself, I only deal with ideas, with myths, with zeitgeist. I want to understand what prompts people into this channel of thinking. What makes people, let's say, embrace Marxism or feminism? I always wonder about the psychological motives, and of course I'm very much concerned with the ideas, because every myth, if you wish, every ideology must have a cluster of ideas which legitimizes this specific belief. Now, this is as far as the European right, and this is as far as the affiliated movements and cultural, you know, we can say think tanks, small think tanks are concerned, including myself. As far as the political arena is concerned, I need to tell you, well, somewhat pessimistically, there hasn't been much success. We have to distinguish here between the New Right and Le Pen and the Front National, or for that matter, Swedish Democrats, or for that matter, Vlaams Belang. Of course, there are some sympathies in those specific political parties, in let's say Swedish what do they call Swedish National Democrats, or NPD in Germany, or Vlaams Belang. There is some sympathy, and they have some good scholars, those political parties, that are probably tapping into the heritage of the European right, and all those scholars, including mine. But let me again specify, and this is the most important thing, Alain de Benoit, including myself, and all those new rightists, and I feel embarrassed talking about them, qualifying myself by this word, we constantly insist on the primacy of ideas, on the primacy of cultural hegemony. You cannot launch a successful party, you cannot scoop up hundreds of thousands young white Danes and start something unless you give them some cultural food, unless you tell them something about their heritage, unless you understand their language, unless you, in other words, you have to give them some cultural artillery.
Exactly.
They can fight with.
This is what the communists succeeded very
Absolutely.
well with.
Absolutely.
The cultural communists before that, of course.
Well, by the way, like for instance, until 1968, you could not possibly imagine Sarkozy. Well, probably it's not the best example, but like for instance, Schiller, or what is this guy named Joschka Fischer, or those people were just up on the opposite side. They were 68ers, you know. They were sort of a hippie type of a folks. But what they did very diligently, and I really have to give them credit for that, regardless of what I think about their ideas, which in my view are stupid and dangerous also. But nonetheless, they started infiltrating universities, creches, kindergartens, so on. They actually also, they managed to voice their imagery, you know, their aesthetics, the false aesthetics in my view, but they managed to do it also in the popular music, in the popular culture, and they gradually made themselves digestible and appealing to wide, large masses of young people. And 20 years after, as of the last 20th century, as of today, they all sit now in the power. They're sitting in glass houses.
Good nationalists and rightists, actually, some of them.
And we are still on the other side, and that's precisely how we have to start. We have to, like for instance, the discussion we had this morning and yesterday in this conference, which I think is quite important, because it doesn't deal with politics, with daily politics. We are not interested in this conference with daily politics. No. We're specifically interested with ideas. Yes.